spirit and truth. Those who say that they know him must walk as he walked. Those who worship the Lord worship in spirit and truth. Those who say that they know him must walk as he walked. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light. If we say that we know him, but we don't keep his word, then we walk in the darkness, and the truth's not in us. If we walk in the light, we will have fellowship sweet, and the blood of Jesus will cleanse us from sin. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light. He is the way and the truth, and in him is the life. If we obey his word, then we walk in the light.
Well, good morning, friends. Here we are, another day, already Thursday. Can you believe it? What if I do this? What if I do that? What does that do? How do you know if I'm even here? What evidence is there that I am here? You can't see me. Does that mean I'm not here? Just a little experiment here with how I'm doing what I'm doing here this morning. How do you know that I'm here? This could just be a recording, you know. You hear noises. There's some evidence that maybe I am here, but you don't see me. How do you know I am here? Okay, I know. Stop doing this to you. I understand. Jane. Jane. So here is something that Jane is saying, and I'm going to put this up on the screen. You can hear your voice. We can hear God's if we quiet ourselves and read his word. Yeah, so you've got live red, a red live flashing. All right. Well, okay. Well, let me. There. Is that better? Is that better? Does that work? Okay, there was sound. There's activity. Now you see me. I mean, so there are people who will say, well, we can't see God. How do we know that God exists? How do we know? I mean, that's the question. How do we know that God exists? Now, I left it on that black screen on purpose for illustrative purposes to illustrate the point. There'll be people who will say, we can't see God. So how do we know that God exists? Can you see electricity? Actually, can you see it? That is a question that I would ask. No, we can't see. Can you see wind? We can see the effects of electricity. We have the effects of electricity around us right now. I mean, we are online with because electricity is functioning, and we can be online. What about the whole wireless thing? I mean, how do we even talk on like wireless telephones? We can't see those. We can't see it. How do we know that it exists? And so people who will say to us, I mean, we can't see God, so how do we know that God exists? Evidence. Evidence. There is evidence of electricity. If I were to go around and I would have 4 switches I'd have to turn off, plus my screens to make my office dark, I could go back to the darkness again. With I guess a click of a button here, I could make it mostly dark again. But just because you can't see it doesn't mean that it doesn't exist. Just because you can't see God doesn't mean that God doesn't exist. Just because you can't see the wind doesn't mean that that the wind doesn't exist. I mean, can you grab the wind? I mean, the wind can grab you, but you can't grab the wind. Is that not true? Can you affect the wind? Probably there can be some effect of the wind. I mean, if you put a building up, it affects the wind. But the wind can affect you. I mean, it blows my gorgeous head of hair all over the place when I go outside. Has that effect on me. But just because I can't see the wind doesn't mean that the wind does not exist, and that there is not evidence for the existence of the wind, electricity, wind. A few days ago, I talked about the no-see-ums, those like little gnat types of things that you can't see, but just because you can't see them doesn't mean that they are not there. Certainly, they are there. The older you get, things don't need to be quite as small anymore for you to not see them. I mean, it's just kind of the way things are. Just because you can't see it doesn't mean it doesn't exist. So, I mean, we can rule out that argument with people who want to say to us, well, I can't see God. How do I know that God exists? Evidence. Evidence, friends. And we've talked plenty about the evidence. But there are other people, and I'm not going to deal with this in entirety likely this morning, because I'm not. There's a lot to this conversation. Well, okay, you've convinced me. There is evidence for God. We can point to the creation. We can point to order in the world, that things are orderly. We can point to the 11 systems of the human body. I know I say these things. You guys are like, okay, you're like a record that just keeps playing over and over and over and over again. I want us to get some of these things firmly fixed into our minds, that we'd be able to say them to other people. I mean, the planets spinning on their axis, the planets maintaining their proper orbit. If you do a little bit of scientific research study ask the question, so what if I were to change, or what if one of the planets were to change its orbit? What impact would that have on the rest of the universe? Likely plenty of impact it would have on the rest of the universe. Much, much, much impact. It would change everything. What if we were to slow down the Earth in its spinning? What impact would that have? That would significantly change temperatures. It might change the effects of gravity. So to change those things could have and would have a significant impact on us. So order. I mean, we can argue for the existence of God from order. We can argue for the existence of God through the evidence of what we see, the vast array of species, not only among animals, but among plants and fishes and all those things. The vast array point to, and the fact that the systems work over and over and over and over again when a young couple decides that they want to have a child, providing that everything is good with them and working, and that there aren't some other underlying medical issues. We know the process of conception right on through childbirth, and roughly 9 months, roughly. And we know what most often, in the vast majority, 99.something% of the time, what a child will look like. It'll look like a baby when it's born. If it were all left to chance, how would we know that every time a child was born, it would look like a human being? Order. And so we can give argument for the existence of God. Okay, so some people will say, well, okay, there's evidence. But I don't want to believe in God because there is evil in the world. How can there be evil in the world? I mean, if God really exists, and if God is really loving, and if God really is all-powerful, certainly he would do something about the evil that is in the world. And that is the argument that some people will present. And friends, to some of the things I need to tell you, I do not have easy answers. For instance, 80 million people, World War II, decimated, killed, lost their lives in World War II. I mean, why didn't God just intervene and just stop that? He could have stopped that. Well, I want to give you the argument, the first argument, and we'll see how far we go today and how long I linger with you. But the first argument is the argument of freedom. That is an argument why God does not step in and deal with the problems that are in our world. Everything from the macro experience of something like World War II to the micro experience of a family having a child, and there is a major deformity or a major problem physiologically with the child. Well, why did God not just step in? If God is good and God is loving and God is, then certainly he would have intervened. So I won't believe in God because God didn't love me. God didn't care for me in that struggle. And I want to answer that, try to answer that at least, as best as I can with minimal preparation. We are in the midst of some incredibly busy days. I'm trying to keep up with a few things here. saying good morning to folks. But those are some of the questions. And again, one of the books, and there are lots, you can YouTube this. Again, I would be a strong proponent of being a person who utilizes driving time or alone time for a couple of different things. Driving time, alone time. This morning I was up, we did some butchering and processing in our home last night. I was up, had some dishes to catch up on. We just kind of ran out of steam last night. So I finished up the dishes and I listened to some podcasts while I did a short podcast while I did the dishes, finished up the dishes this morning. I encourage you to use your time for things like that, or prayer. That is another good use of the time that we have, alone time, driving time, things like that. But evil, okay, if God is loving, let me try to answer that. Freedom, I said I would give the answer of freedom as one of the answers, and there probably will be a multitude of answers. Well, often evil exists because we are evil. Now, we like to think of humanity as, by and large, basically good. And one of the notions of the 20th century was that we would continue to evolve toward peace, and that the world would be a place of peace. And if I were running for Miss America and they asked, what would you want? I would answer, I want world peace. And I would answer it just like that. I mean, that's one of the answers. Will we ever have it? Likely not. Should we pursue it? I think we should. I don't think that it is unreasonable to say that we would pursue peace with other people or peace within humanity. But the fact is, we're never going to get there. Why? Because of evil. And so some people would say, well, God could just step in and stop all the evil and stop us from being evil. The moment that God were to step in at that level, freedom would cease. If God were to cause us to no longer do evil things that hurt other people, and ultimately evil hurts other people, but if God were to step in and cause us to do something to not hurt other people, freedom would cease to exist. One of the reasons that there's evil in the world is that God gives us freedom. If God were to stop in and say, stop the violence, stop the anger, stop the bitterness, stop the hatred, stop the assaults, stop the verbiage that creates pain, stop the fist fighting, stop the family arguments. If God were to step in a supernatural, strong way and stop and cause all those things to cease, we would no longer possess human freedom. And God has given us freedom. He has given us freedom to decide. He has given us freedom to act. He has given us freedom to think. He has given us freedom to speak. He has given us freedom to reason. He has given us freedom to choose. And if the all-powerful God were to step in and cause all that to stop, we would lose freedom. Does this argument make sense to you? Now, I will talk about suffering in a moment here, and these might be things that we need to come back to, but freedom is one of the arguments that we would bring as to why God does not step in and stop all these things. He gave Adam and Eve in the garden the freedom of choice. Because I have not taken us much to the Bible lately, let me take us to the Bible so we can see in Genesis chapter 1. beginning at verse 26. I will pick up at verse 26. And here is what it says. Then God said, let us make man in our image. By the way, let us make man in our image is one of the very first Trinitarian references in the scriptures that God exists in the Trinity. I'm trying to fix something here that's not working properly. And good enough for now. But Trinitarian, God made man. He said, let us make man in our image, in our likeness, and let them being man, rule over the fish of the sea and the birds of the air, over the livestock, over all the earth, over all the creatures that move along the ground. So God created man in his own image. Notice it speaks in the plurality and it speaks in a singularity about God in this passage. One triune God. It says, so, verse 27, so God created man in his own image. In the image of God, he created him, male and female, he created them. God blessed them and said, be fruitful and increase in number, fill the earth and subdue it, fill the earth with people, rule over the fish of the sea, the birds of the air, and over every living creature that moves along the ground. And God said, I have given you every seed-bearing plant on the face of the whole earth, and every tree that has fruit with seed in it. They will be yours for food. You can make an argument there, perhaps, for vegetarianism. And to all the beasts of the earth and all the birds of the air and all the creatures that move on the ground, everything that has the breath of life in it, I give every green plant for food. And it was so that creation apparently first herbivores. God saw all that he made. It was very good. And there was evening, there was morning, the 6th day. So man made in the image of God. I don't think that we have got sidetracked for a moment in the comments here. We haven't come to the problem yet. God made man in his image. But you get into the second chapter of the book of book of Genesis. Down at verse 15. Says the Lord took the man and put him in the Garden of Eden to work it and care for. I mean, we can make an argument for our responsibility, stewardship of the earth. The Lord commanded the man, you are free to eat from any tree in the garden, but you must not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, for when you eat of it, you will surely die. In fact, a good rendering of that would say, for when you eat of it, dying, you will surely die, because you could interpret that, well, immediate death, like eating a poison berry. Well, it wasn't immediate death, but it would bring dying, you will die, would be a good translation in verse 17. Verse 18, the Lord said, it is not good for man to be alone, and I'll make a suitable helper suitable for him. But God gave man in this passage right here, he gave man choice. He gave man freedom. The freedom to choose, the freedom to obey, the freedom to acknowledge, the freedom to believe, the freedom to reject. God gave mankind freedom. And the freedom to do all of these things. Walter has said this in his comments. He says, a loving God took a big chance when he gave mankind the freedom to reject his love. Christie says, was the Son and Spirit was not created yet? No, they were. They were not created. The Son and Spirit were not created. They are a part of the eternal triune Godhead, the 3 in 1. The Spirit was there. In fact, I could take you back to Genesis chapter 1 and show you something. In verse 2, answering Christy's question. Let me start at verse 1 in the beginning. God created the heavens and the earth. Now the earth was formless and empty. Darkness was over the surface of the deep. And the Spirit of God was hovering over the waters. So there you see reference to the Spirit of God in Genesis 1, verse 2. The Son was not created. The Son was incarnated when Jesus was born in human fashion among mankind, but Jesus was pre-existent. In fact, Jesus is considered to be the creator of the world. Let me show you a few other passages here to help us understand that he was creator of all things. Let me take you over to the book of Colossians, chapter 1. He is the image of the invisible God, the firstborn over all creation. I said, oh, wait, right there it says he is born. Well, firstborn means first place. And in the mind of God, the eternal mind of God, the Son was born even before there was the creation. God had a plan before anything was created. And that plan included the incarnation of Christ, but also firstborn over all creation, meaning the highest place. So the Son has the highest place. Verse 16, Colossians chapter 1, for by him all things were created, by him being Jesus, by him all things were created, things in heaven and on earth, visible and invisible, whether thrones or powers or rulers or authorities, all things were created by him and for him. He is before all things, and in him all things hold together. The in him is speaking of Jesus, showing us, and there are other passages, John chapter 1. Here we go. In the beginning was the Word was with God, the Word was God, he was with God in the beginning. And notice it says in verse 1, the Word was God. This is another passage we go to understand the divinity of Christ. Through him, all things were made, speaking of him being the Word being Jesus. Through him, all things were made. Without him, nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of men. And we will talk about that on the 28th of November and the 7th of November. We'll talk a little bit more about Jesus being the light, but here are a few passages. You can go over to the book of Hebrews as another place that just underlines, underscores for us who Jesus is. Verse 2, in these last days, he has spoken to us by his Son, whom he appointed heir over all things, through whom he made the universe. So there are at least three passages, Hebrews 1, Colossians 1, John 1. You can remember 1, right? John 1, Colossians 1, Hebrews 1. All are places, if you're talking to people about Jesus and about who the Creator is, you can go to John 1, Colossians 1, Hebrews 1 to underscore those things. Now, all of this came out of Genesis chapter 1, the fact that we as mankind are made in the image of God ourselves, and that we have been given freedom. Now, let me get back to the subject at hand. Well, there's suffering. Why doesn't God, in his power, intervene in our suffering? The conclusion to the matter, the answer that I'm providing for us this morning is, if God were to do so, it would remove from us our freedom. Well, and some would say, well, couldn't God just make us good? Well, that would make God the puppeteer and us the puppet. That would make God the autocratic one, the autocrat, if God were to take away our freedom. God, in his love, gave us his gave us our freedom. Now, Christy, continuing to ask good questions. She's engaged with this morning. Does this mean our God, Jehovah, created other gods that exist? No other gods exist. I understand most evil comes from the fallen angel Satan, but always struggle with this. No, he did not. He did not create other gods. Satan is not a god. Satan is a created being. So God did not make other gods. Now, the other thing is, I understand that most evil comes from the fallen angel Satan. Well, that is partially true, because evil also comes from us. When you go to Genesis chapter 3, yes, Satan led a cohort, a legion, multiple legions perhaps, of angels in their fall out of heaven, in their rebellion against God, wanting to be God themselves, be like gods themselves. But Satan also brought in his temptation and in his deception sinfulness to humanity. Now, a question could be, if Satan had not shown up in Genesis chapter 3, would Adam and Eve been tempted by the tree of the knowledge of good and evil? They may have been. The text tells us that they were tempted by Satan, but they themselves made their own decision. I was talking to a man one time that was going through a rather contemptuous relational issue and a real battle with, there was just a whole family mess. And he wanted, I was talking to him, he said, well, the devil. And when I looked at him, what I saw was his own flesh being in the way. And I said to the man, I said his name, I said, look, Satan doesn't need to help you any. Your flesh is doing plenty. Evil comes from us. Evil also, yes, Satan brings evil to the world, but we bring evil to the world. We bring evil to the world in evil thoughts. We bring evil to the world in evil words. We bring evil to the world in evil actions. And now the consequences of evil have been rolled out for us. Consequences like illness, disease, the impact on our environment is an example. The negative things that we face in our environment are largely man-made consequences of how we have treated or mistreated the earth. And so much of it can be pointed right to us as people, as human beings, and the evil that we bring to the world, and the fallout of that now we are all plagued, all touched, all smitten negatively by evil. Don asked the question, wouldn't that also have taken away our ability to have compassion? Well, likely yes. I mean, human emotion, human reasoning, human desire, good or bad. If we did not have freedom, we may not also have desire, because if we had desire, I'm trying to remember a movie that Wendy and I just watched a few weeks ago. Was it Blue Man? Guy. Maybe it was Guy. The Guy. Ryan Reynolds. But he was a character in a video game. But then he began to take on his own, to realize he could have his own life. And so he left... he began doing things in the video game, and the code writers are like, we don't understand, we must have a virus. We've got something going on, because this one character just is starting to do his own thing. And, you know, is there some hacker that is hacked in? And that movie in some fashion makes us think about, what about our freedom? What about our ability to choose? And now there's some negative connotation to the movie. Be who you want to be. And you can take that to the, love who you want to love and all of those things that are a part of that. The outcome of that. But it also shows the pushback of mankind against its creator, to do its own thing, to do our own thing. What would be the impact of God removing from us freedom? The freedom of emotion, the freedom of compassion, the freedom of choice, the freedom. There is a lot to that. Freedom is an argument for why God doesn't just step in, because for God to just step in he would have to eliminate human freedom and make us all robotic. We would be less than artificial intelligence, maybe, if God were to step in and remove all evil caused by human decision, human freedom, human ability to choose. So in the elimination of evil in that way, by God just stepping in, would remove freedom. Does this make sense to you? I hope that it makes sense to you. I'm doing my best to have it make sense. There are other folks you could go and watch that would make a lot more sense to you. And there are series of lectures on these issues. You can watch hours and hours and hours of lectures. There are also some very good 8 to 10 minutes. There's some like 2 to 3 minute little snips on these types of issues. And there are several 8 to 10 minute, 8, 10, 12 minute snips, clips, videos that you can watch on YouTube that deal with these, as well as a number of the thinkers that you can look at, go for at least an hour. So I'm filling up our time trying to consider this, and maybe I've gone as far as I can go on the issue of freedom. So let me come back to a second argument. Well, if God were all loving, then God would certainly step in and take away our pain. Well, here's the thing. God doesn't take away our pain, and are there benefits of human pain and human suffering? In some measure. I'm not talking that everything is good. I'm not talking that there is a positive outcome on every aspect of human pain and suffering. I'm not trying to say that. But are there benefits of our suffering as well? And what does God do in response to our suffering? I'm going to step away from my desk for only just a moment. I'll be right back. I'm going to turn down the heat just a little bit. I'm back. And so what about the aspect of compassion and suffering? Well, here is part of an answer that a number of theologians and philosophers that I looked at have given, and some of my favorite ones, although it does well for us to listen to people who maybe take an opposing view. God works in the midst of our suffering. God refines us in suffering. God meets us in suffering. Jesus Christ coming to earth, he came to earth. He did not come in resplendent glory. He did not come in all of his magnificence. He did not come as royalty. He came as the one who would be the suffering servant. Jesus came to enter our pain. Jesus knew the internal toil and struggle of decision when prior to the cross, he cried out to the Father, my Father, if it were possible, take this cup from me. Yet nevertheless, not what I want, but what you want, not my will, but your will. And the struggle was so intense that we are told that he sweat, as it were, great drops of blood. Then there's the cross itself, the suffering that Jesus went through, the suffering of temptation, the suffering of trial, the suffering of negative public opinion, the suffering of betrayal, the suffering of misunderstanding, the suffering of maybe wanting things that he couldn't have, the suffering of overcoming sin. Jesus understands our suffering. God in heaven, the Father, understands our suffering as he suffered at the brutal death of his Son, at the beating, at the mockery, at the filleting of his Son's flesh with the cat o' nine tails as Jesus was beaten, with the mockery, with even the creation itself, as it were, turning its back at the death of Christ when the earth grew dark. God enters our suffering, and so he is not a distant God. He is not a God that has removed himself from human pain and from human suffering by any stretch of the imagination. No, rather, he came to us in that suffering to meet with us. Now, Jessica has commented over on the YouTube side. With this, she has said, if you didn't have pain, you wouldn't learn compassion. Pain helps us have compassion. That is absolutely true. And God often refines us in pain, and God refines us in suffering if we will allow him to. Now, God will not force himself upon us in our suffering and in our pain, but God offers himself to us in our pain and in our suffering. He enters it with us. It's like people that I have sat with along the way. I was up at the Bangor Hospital yesterday for visiting somebody, and I was thinking about a family that I had met in the parking garage a number of years ago, 6-7 years ago, I think now, and to have to give them the bad news about the death of a parent and the outcome of some tragedy. And what do? You hug them, you hold them, you let them weep and wail and cry, and hardly a word is spoken, and we enter into the suffering and the pain with others, not with the answers or not with I'll fix this, but that I will be with you. And that is exactly what God did with us in our pain, in our suffering, is to enter into it with us. Christy commenting this, it surprises how much suffering God allows. Some suffering directs us, like in Genesis, he is a woman give birth, and then the remembrance of Jesus. And there is plenty of suffering that God allows, partly because for God to intervene would have major ramifications on human freedom. But God also offers to meet with us in our suffering. Now, I'm going to continue talking more about this idea of if God is good or if God is all-powerful. If there is a God, how can he allow this evil and this suffering? I'll continue on this theme some tomorrow. But I wanted to bring at least two considerations to us today. The consideration of freedom, the impact upon freedom, and the consideration of God's compassion in entering into our suffering together with us. Now, I know for some that is not an adequate enough of an answer. We've talked about the evidence for the existence of God. We're talking some now about God and evil and suffering in our world. We've talked some about the sources of evil in our world. Yes, the rebellion of legions of angels led by Lucifer, Satan. Yes, that is part of it. But then our own humanity and what we bring to suffering in our world, in our decision-making, in our own sinfulness. So, friends, I'm going to stop there, I think, today. Walter had a great comment up above, and he said, communism is a good example of what happens when freedom is taken away. And we think they will take care of us. They promise to take care of us, but then if they don't take care of us in the way they, being government, would be an example in a communist setting, if they don't take care of us in the way that we want, we no longer have freedom to choose something else, because the communist way is we will provide all this for you, and we will level the playing field, and yet you do not have freedom. You would not have freedom to pick what camper you want to have, or where you want to go on your vacation, or what automobile you want to drive, or even if they controlled the food supply, even what foods you could get. And we've seen this through history, where they go and all they can get is bread, and lines of people standing outside of a grocery store simply to get a loaf of bread. Communism, because freedoms were taken. And so if God were to step in and take away our freedom, there's an example of what our experience would be like. So Jane has said it's a great beginning for me to understand how to respond to others. We'll continue in this. It is not the area of my greatest strength, but it's something that I feel that we need to try to wrestle with. So if you've listened, I am not the foremost philosopher by any stretch of the imagination, but I'm trying to bring to us some thought that can help to direct us, or at least give us the ability to respond to others who want to throw out all their arguments and reasons for why they will not follow God. Mostly people, I think, choose to say, I don't believe in God, which they might believe that there's a God, but I choose to not surrender to God because, frankly, I don't like him. And if I surrender to him, I'm going to have to do things his way, and I don't want that. That's the truth of the matter for most people, even the people who say I don't believe in God. And when pressed, often they will even say, well, yeah, actually, I do believe in a higher power. I don't want to call him God. I don't want to give Jesus the credence that way. And speaking of Jesus and giving him the credence, people will take other people, other names, other mystical figures, and try to parlay onto Jesus. Onto those people, some of the works and ways of Jesus, but yet there's not a shred of historical evidence that they actually did those things, like death and resurrection and things of that nature. Just some stuff I was listening to yesterday, thinking about Christmas time. We live in a time when people we've made truth whatever we say it is. So truth is whatever comes out of my mouth. We see that everywhere, from politics to little children. It's all over the place. It's the way of humanity to be that way. And yet I do think it is getting worse and worse and worse, where we're willing to believe preposterous things because we don't want to believe the most evident things and have to subscribe to them. Well, friends, I'm going to stop there for today and let you get into your day. I want to pray God's blessing on you. I hope that this has been somewhat helpful. There will be more. I will roll out more. As I said yesterday, there's many other things that are often necessity in the life of clergy, of a pastor, and I could probably, in the things that we're looking at, spend the entirety of my days in preparation each week. But I give you my best. So, friends, I have a great day. Walk with Jesus today. Ask God to sharpen your mind and your heart today, and to help you have understanding. So, Lord, it's our prayer. Help us to have our minds open to truth, to your truth. All true truth is your truth. So help us to have our minds open to it. Help us to be able to think biblically. Help us to be able to think rationally. Help us to be able to think reasonably. Help us to be able to think in a way that brings you honor and glory. In Jesus' name, amen. Well, friends, it's Thursday. That means that there is a prayer gathering for those that are able to attend. I will not be here today. I have a meeting with some other folks this morning. You can pray for that meeting. It's about cleaning out a property, a house, through some unfortunate circumstances, but trying to help a family out. Anyway, friends, have a good day. We will see you again tomorrow.